Dearest listeners, there exists a peculiar cruelty in the institution of marriage when entered without affection. Yet society demands we smile through such arrangements as though they were blessings from Providence itself. Today, your humble chronicler brings you the most haunting tale of a union forged in desperation and tempered in the fires of near tragedy. If you enjoy these chronicles of hearts tested and triumphant, do press the like button below and subscribe for more tales from Regency England. But let us not rush. For the most profound truths, like the slow melting of a long, cold winter, must reveal themselves in their own due time. The morning of Lady Vivian Ashworth's wedding dawned gray and unforgiving, as though the heavens themselves disapproved of the union about to be solemnized. Rain pelted the ancient stones of St. George's Chapel with a violence that seemed almost personal, and the bride stood before the mirror on her dressing table, illuminated by the scant morning light filtering through heavy clouds. Her dark hair, usually a cascade of thick, lustrous waves, had been dressed by her maid with ribbons, yet even the artifice could not conceal the tension in her neck. The gown was exquisite, naturally. Her mother had insisted upon that much, though the funds had come from the very man Vivian was about to wed. But the face reflected in the small glass appeared wan, resigned, utterly devoid of the joy that ought to animate a bride on her wedding day. At 23, Vivian had long since abandoned the romantic fancies of her girlhood. The daughter of Viscount Ashworth, she had been raised to expect a respectable match, perhaps even an advantageous one, for she possessed both beauty and breeding. Her figure was slight, perhaps too much so, giving her an air of fragility that was not entirely misleading. She had always been delicate in constitution, though her spirit had proven considerably more robust. But all such considerations had become irrelevant 18 months prior, when her father's political miscalculations had transformed their comfortable existence into something approaching catastrophe. Viscount Ashworth had backed the wrong faction in a parliamentary dispute of considerable complexity, and had compounded this error by speaking too freely about matters that powerful men preferred to keep obscure. The retribution had been swift and merciless. Within a year, the Ashworth family teetered on the precipice of complete ruin. The Viscount faced not merely social disgrace, but actual imprisonment for debt. It was in these desperate circumstances that Lord Damien Rothwell, Earl of Thornwick, had made his offer. The Earl would settle all debts and use his considerable political influence to rehabilitate the Viscount's standing. In exchange, he required only one thing: Lady Vivian's hand in marriage. The reasons were not mysterious. Lord Rothwell was 35, a widower of 5 years' standing, and in possession of a vast estate that required an heir to prevent its passing to a cousin he despised. His first marriage had been brief and tragic. Lady Eleanor Rothwell had died in childbed, along with the son she had labored to bring forth. Since that time, the Earl had lived in near seclusion at his principal seat in Gloucestershire. His apartments were maintained with the precision of a tomb, and the smell of disuse in the abandoned west corridors attested to the time he spent in isolation, dedicating himself to the administration of the vast estate that needed an heir to prevent it passing to a cousin he detested. Her father had presented the offer with tears in his eyes, begging her forgiveness even as he outlined the necessity of her acceptance. Vivian had simply nodded. What else could she do? The choice, such as it was, had been no choice at all. She had met Lord Rothwell precisely twice before the wedding. He had examined her much as one might evaluate a horse being considered for purchase, noting, she supposed, that she appeared sound of wind and limb, capable of bearing the children he required. He stood tall with the bearing of a man who had commanded a regiment of cavalry in Spain during the Peninsular Wars. His hair was dark, threaded with silver at the temples. His features were regular, even handsome, though severity marked every line of his face. His eyes, of a striking pale blue, held a coldness that no amount of formal courtesy could warm. Lord Rothwell wore a locket on a short gold chain that disappeared beneath his cravat, though Vivian glimpsed it once at dinner, resting just above his waistcoat's top button. A lock of fair hair preserved behind glass, visible proof of his continuing devotion to the dead. The ceremony passed in a blur of ritual and rain. St. George's was far too grand for the sparse attendance. Lord Rothwell arrived precisely on time and took his place before the altar without looking at her. When she processed down the aisle on her father's arm, she observed that he did not turn to watch her approach. Vivian spoke her vows in a voice that did not waver, though her hands trembled. Lord Rothwell's responses were equally steady. His hands, when they clasped hers, were cool and impersonal. The ring was a simple but imposing gold band that felt cold and excessively heavy on her finger. When the vicar pronounced them man and wife, Lord Rothwell brushed his lips against hers in the briefest possible acknowledgement. The kiss was so fleeting, so devoid of warmth, that it scarcely warranted the name. The wedding breakfast was mercifully brief. Lord Rothwell had made it clear he wished to depart for Thornwick Manor that very afternoon. Vivian found herself saying farewell to her family far sooner than anticipated. Then she was being handed into his traveling carriage, and the door was closing behind her. The Earl climbed in after her and immediately turned his attention to correspondence, leaving Vivian to contemplate her new situation in silence. They traveled thus for nearly an hour before he spoke, and then only to inquire whether she was comfortable. She assured him she was perfectly well. He nodded and returned to his letters. The journey to Gloucestershire required 2 days. Separate chambers had been prepared at the coaching inn. Lord Rothwell informed her of this without explanation. Vivian spent the evening alone in her room, staring at the unfamiliar ring on her hand. The following day brought more silent travel. Lord Rothwell read, made notes, occasionally gazed out the window, but never once attempted conversation beyond the necessary. Thornwick Manor revealed itself in the late afternoon. The house stood atop a gentle rise, commanding views of extensive parkland. It was built primarily of gray stone in the Elizabethan style, with tall windows and numerous chimneys. Under other circumstances, Vivian might have found it beautiful. As matters stood, it appeared merely imposing. Servants had assembled to greet their new mistress. The butler, whom we shall call Hastings, presented the housekeeper, Mrs. Dutton, an austere woman who curtsied with more respect for rank than warmth. Other servants were introduced in rapid succession. Lord Rothwell stood apart during these proceedings. When the formalities concluded, he addressed his bride directly. Mrs. Dutton will show you to your apartments and acquaint you with the household arrangements. I have matters requiring my attention. We dine at 7. He strode away, leaving Vivian to follow the housekeeper. The interior proved as impressive as the facade. Mrs. Dutton led her through corridors and chambers, providing information about the house's history and routines. The Countess's apartments occupied the entire east wing. They were spacious, elegant, and utterly soulless. Everything was perfectly maintained and completely impersonal. His lordship's chambers adjoin yours through that door, Mrs. Dutton informed her. He requested that I inform you he will not disturb you this evening. Tomorrow morning I shall acquaint you with the household accounts. The housekeeper departed, leaving Vivian alone. A maid appeared with hot water, but Vivian dismissed her, wanting only solitude. Dinner that evening was an ordeal. The dining room was sized to accommodate perhaps 30 guests comfortably, making 2 diners at opposite ends of an enormous table feel absurd. Lord Rothwell arrived precisely at 7. The meal proceeded through multiple courses. The silence was as vast as the space between them. Across a table that could accommodate 30 guests, conversation was not impossible. It was simply unthinkable. Lord Rothwell inquired once whether the meal was to her liking. She assured him it was excellent. The silence returned. When the meal concluded, Lord Rothwell announced he had correspondence and departed. Vivian found her way back to her apartments and permitted herself, for the first time since this nightmare began, to weep. The first weeks established a pattern. Vivian rose at 8, breakfasted alone, and spent her mornings learning household management. Mrs. Dutton proved an efficient if chilly instructor. Lord Rothwell she saw only at dinner, which continued to be an exercise in uncomfortable formality. He inquired after her health with the same tone one might use to ask a tenant about crop yields. Gradually, Vivian began exploring Thornwick Manor. The picture gallery particularly drew her attention. She found Lord Rothwell's portrait there, painted perhaps 10 years earlier, showing a man whose face lacked the deep lines that now marked it. But it was another portrait that truly arrested her, that of Lady Eleanor Rothwell. The painting showed a woman of extraordinary beauty. Eleanor had been fair where Vivian was dark, with golden hair and startling blue eyes. She wore a gown of celestial white. Beneath the portrait, a small brass plaque bore her dates, 1792–1815. She had been 23 when she died, the same age Vivian was now. Vivian returned to this portrait repeatedly, studying the woman she could never replace. Lord Rothwell had no intention of allowing her to replace Eleanor in any meaningful sense. His first wife had been perfection, beautiful, accomplished, beloved. What chance did Vivian have, particularly when she had been acquired out of necessity rather than chosen from affection? The portrait was not the only shrine to Eleanor. In the music room, Eleanor's harp stood draped in cloth. In the conservatory, certain flowers were cultivated because they had been Lady Eleanor's favorites. Most disturbingly, that locket Lord Rothwell wore, always present, always visible as a reminder of devotion that transcended death. A month passed, then 2. Lord Rothwell maintained his distance, treating her with a remote courtesy that was somehow worse than hostility. Vivian began to feel like furniture, useful, adequately maintained, utterly unworthy of notice. The servants respected her but showed little warmth. She issued instructions, reviewed accounts, approved menus, but remained somehow peripheral to Thornwick's life. Her only solace came from the library, a magnificent room lined with books. Here she spent afternoons losing herself in volumes of history and poetry. The library had been Eleanor's favorite room as well, but Vivian refused to abandon this one pleasure. It was in the library, on a gray afternoon in her 3rd month at Thornwick, that Vivian made a discovery that would alter her understanding. She had been searching for Wordsworth when several books fell, dislodging a slim leather journal that had been concealed behind them. Curious, she opened it and found Eleanor Rothwell's private diary. The early entries described social events, observations about books and music. But as Vivian read deeper, a different picture emerged. Eleanor had not been happy at Thornwick. She had been lonely, yearning for London society she had left behind. She wrote of feeling inadequate, of Damien's distance and preoccupation with estate matters. She described feeling like a beautiful ornament, admired but not truly known. Most startling were entries from the final months, during her pregnancy. She wrote of terror of childbirth, of her husband's intense focus on the coming heir, of feeling valuable only as a vessel for continuing the Rothwell line. The final entry, dated a week before her death, was heartbreaking. I wonder if he would grieve more for me or for the son I carry. Some days, I suspect the latter, and the knowledge pierces me more deeply than any physical pain. Vivian closed the journal with trembling hands. Eleanor had not been the perfect creature everyone remembered. She had been a lonely young woman, trapped in a marriage where she was valued for her reproductive potential. The parallel was impossible to ignore, and yet there was strange comfort in discovering she was not alone in her unhappiness. She carefully returned the journal to its hiding place, but the knowledge remained, coloring her perception of Lord Rothwell and his grief. The transformation came during early winter, when cold rains swelled the streams crossing Thornwick's parkland. Vivian was returning from visiting a tenant family when she heard a child's terrified screaming. Without thought, she gathered her sodden skirts and ran toward the sound. At the swollen stream, she found young Thomas Fletcher, the gamekeeper's son, perhaps 7 years old, clinging desperately to a partially submerged tree branch whilst the current pulled at his small body. Vivian did not hesitate. She waded into the icy water, gasping as it soaked through her clothing. The current threatened to sweep her off her feet, but she pressed forward, reaching for the child. Her fingers closed around his wrist just as his grip failed, and she hauled him toward her. Getting them both to the bank proved difficult. Vivian's waterlogged skirts dragged like anchors, and Thomas panicked, thrashing and nearly pulling them both under. But she held fast, speaking calmly, telling him she had him, that he was safe. Somehow she managed to reach the bank and push the boy onto solid ground. She had just dragged herself out, shaking with cold and exhaustion, when Lord Rothwell appeared on horseback, accompanied by Fletcher and several men searching for the missing child. The Earl dismounted, his face shocked as he took in the scene. His wife, drenched and muddy, kneeling beside the gamekeeper's son, who was coughing but alive. The precision of his voice was that of an officer inspecting a wound, but when he truly saw her, truly comprehended what she had done, something in him fractured. What in God's name, your recklessness? You could have drowned, Vivian. What would have been left of me? What then, of our pact, of the loss would have been insufferable. He stopped abruptly, but he did not speak of the heir or of duty. For the first time, she glimpsed something more than his need. A flash of alarm unrelated to his dynastic requirements, a fear that seemed almost personal. Fletcher rushed to his son, weeping with relief, whilst Vivian attempted to rise and found her legs would not support her. Lord Rothwell was at her side instantly, his hands gripping her shoulders, his face closer than it had been since their wedding. Before she could process this, he had swept her into his arms and was carrying her toward his horse with grim determination. The ride back passed in a blur. Vivian found herself wrapped in his greatcoat, held before him on his saddle, her head resting against his chest. She was aware of his arms around her, holding her secure, of the rapid beat of his heart, of his voice giving sharp orders. At the manor, he carried her inside, shouting for Mrs. Dutton, for supplies, for the doctor immediately. Vivian tried to protest she was well, but in truth she felt far from well. The cold had settled deep, and she could not stop shaking. Lord Rothwell deposited her in her bedchamber with uncharacteristic gentleness, barking orders at maids. A hot foot bath and basin of warm water were brought immediately. She was dried quickly and bundled into a warm nightgown, then tucked into bed which had been heated with warming pans. The doctor arrived and examined her, pronouncing her sound but requiring rest to prevent a chill settling in her lungs. Through it all, Vivian was aware of Lord Rothwell's presence in her sitting room. When the doctor departed and maids were dismissed, Lord Rothwell appeared in her bedchamber doorway. She expected him to inquire after her health and leave. Instead, he entered and stood at the foot of her bed. "That was extraordinarily brave," he said at last, "and extraordinarily stupid." "He would have drowned," Vivian replied hoarsely. "And you nearly joined him. You are no larger than a child yourself. What possessed you?" "I did not think. I simply acted." Something flickered across his face. Surprise, perhaps reassessment. "Yes, I suppose you did." He was silent, then added with obvious difficulty, "Fletcher is beside himself with gratitude. The boy will be fine, thanks to you. I have told Fletcher his family need never fear want whilst they live on Thornwick land." "That is generous." "It is nothing compared to what you risked." He paused. "I am grateful that you are well. The thought of—" He broke off sharply and left the room. Vivian lay pondering this strange interaction. For the first time, Lord Rothwell had seemed to see her as a person. The concern in his voice had been genuine. It was not much, but it was something, a crack in the armor. Her recovery took several days, during which Lord Rothwell did something unprecedented. He visited her chambers daily to inquire after her health. The visits were brief and formal, but they occurred nonetheless. Vivienne found herself looking forward to these moments with embarrassing eagerness. When she resumed normal activities, she discovered her status within the household had shifted. The servants regarded her with new warmth, the rescue story having spread throughout the estate. Even Mrs. Dutton referred to her as brave. Lord Rothwell, however, seemed determined to retreat into customary reserve. Dinners returned to awkward formality. He withdrew to his study after meals. The crack in his facade sealed over. But change, once initiated, proves difficult to reverse. A fortnight after the incident, Vivienne woke feeling decidedly unwell. The sensation was difficult to describe. Not quite nausea, but unsettledness of the stomach, accompanied by unusual fatigue. When the same sensations persisted, accompanied by sensitivity to certain smells and changed appetite, Vivienne began to suspect the truth. A consultation with the doctor confirmed what she had deduced. She was with child. The news filled her with complex emotions, relief that she would fulfill her primary purpose, anxiety about childbirth dangers, made acute by knowledge of Eleanor's fate, and unexpected sadness that this child was merely the product of dutiful conjugal encounters that occurred weekly with all the warmth of a business transaction. She knew she must inform Lord Rothwell immediately, yet she dreaded the conversation. That evening, she requested a private audience in his study. He granted it with obvious curiosity. "You wish to speak with me?" he prompted. "Yes, I have news of importance." She clasped her trembling hands. "I am with child." For a moment, Lord Rothwell's face revealed nothing. Then something flickered. Satisfaction, as expected, but also something else, something that might have been concern. He rose and came around the desk, stopping at a respectful distance. "I see. When did you learn of this?" "The doctor confirmed it this morning. I believe I am perhaps 6 weeks along." He nodded slowly. "That is satisfactory. You will of course take every precaution. I shall instruct Mrs. Dutton to ensure you are not overtaxed. The doctor must attend you regularly. Whatever you require, you have only to ask." "Thank you," Vivienne said quietly, unable to keep bitterness from her voice. "I am gratified to know that your heir's vessel will be so well maintained." His eyes narrowed. "What precisely do you mean?" "Nothing at all. I merely acknowledge reality. You have acquired what you needed from me. I should be pleased to have fulfilled my purpose." "Your purpose?" He stopped, a muscle working in his jaw. "You think your only value is as a broodmare? Is it not?" Vivienne's voice remained cool. "You married me to provide an heir. I have conceived. The transaction proceeds as planned." "It is not?" He struggled for words. "You make it sound so cold, so calculating." "Is it not both those things? You have been perfectly clear this is a marriage of convenience, nothing more. I enter into no complaint. I understood the terms. But do not ask me to pretend there is anything more." Lord Rothwell stared at her, and for a moment she thought she saw pain cross his features. But he mastered himself quickly. "Very well. If that is how you perceive matters, I shall not attempt to convince you otherwise. I wish you good night, madam." He turned and left, leaving Vivienne alone with the bitter satisfaction of having finally provoked some reaction from him, even if it was merely anger. The following weeks brought changes to Vivienne's routine. True to his word, Lord Rothwell had instructed Mrs. Dutton to ensure she was not overtaxed. The housekeeper began appearing more frequently with suggestions that perhaps her ladyship should rest. Lord Rothwell himself became somehow more present without actually being more present. He continued to maintain his distance, but Vivienne would occasionally find him watching her during dinner with an expression she could not quite interpret. Once, when she rose from the table too quickly and swayed slightly with dizziness, he was on his feet instantly, one hand extended as though to steady her, though he checked the movement before actually touching her. "Are you unwell?" he demanded, his voice sharp with what might have been concern. "I am perfectly fine. I merely stood too quickly." Perhaps you should dine in your chambers if the effort of coming downstairs is too taxing. I am with child, Lord Rothwell, not dying of consumption. I am perfectly capable of managing a flight of stairs and a meal. He subsided, but she noticed thereafter that dinner was served somewhat earlier than had been customary, and that the footman seemed to have been instructed to watch her with particular attention. Winter deepened, and Vivian's condition became more apparent. Her slight frame showed the changes earlier than might have occurred in a more robust woman. She found herself tiring more easily, requiring afternoon rests. Her appetite became capricious. Certain foods she had always enjoyed now repulsed her, whilst she developed cravings for unusual combinations. Through it all, the memory of Eleanor's fate hung over Vivian like a shroud. She had not forgotten the diary entry, that final desperate question about whether her husband would grieve more for her or for the child. The parallel was impossible to ignore. She too carried the heir Lord Rothwell desperately needed. If it came to a choice, if the doctor faced that terrible decision during labor, would he choose to save the child or the mother? She knew the answer, and it filled her with a cold dread that had nothing to do with the physical dangers of childbirth. Spring arrived with characteristic English unpredictability, alternating between days of brilliant sunshine and violent storms. Vivienne was now 6 months along, her condition unmistakable. She moved more slowly, tired more easily, and had largely withdrawn from active management of the household. Lord Rothwell had become increasingly solicitous in a manner that somehow managed to be both attentive and distant. He ensured she had every comfort, that the doctor visited regularly, that her chambers were kept at the precise temperature she found most comfortable. Yet he never touched her, never spoke to her beyond polite inquiries, never gave any indication that he saw her as anything more than a valuable object requiring careful maintenance. It was during one of the spring storms, a particularly violent tempest that had blown in from the west with little warning, that everything changed. Vivian had been resting in her sitting room during the afternoon when she heard shouting from somewhere below. Curious and feeling restless after hours of inactivity, she made her way downstairs to discover the source of the commotion. The scene in the main hall was one of controlled chaos. Apparently, a section of the roof over the servants' quarters had been damaged by the storm, and rain was pouring in, threatening to ruin not only the servants' belongings, but also to damage the structure itself. Hastings was directing footmen to move furniture and possessions, whilst Mrs. Dutton marshaled the maids to place basins and buckets beneath the worst leaks. Without thinking, which seemed to be a particular failing of hers, Vivian joined the effort. Her rank meant nothing in a crisis. There was work to be done, and she had 2 hands capable of doing it. She helped carry linens and clothing from threatened chambers, placed receptacles beneath leaks, attempted to direct water away from areas where it might do the most damage. No one thought to question the Countess's presence in the servants' quarters. The urgency of the situation overrode considerations of propriety. Vivian worked alongside maids and footmen, her condition making her movements awkward but not preventing her from being useful. She was in the midst of helping to drag a trunk from beneath a particularly severe leak when the world suddenly tilted. The exertion, combined with the stuffy air in the cramped quarters, had proven too much. Vivian felt her vision narrow to a tunnel, heard a strange rushing sound in her ears, and then knew nothing at all. She woke in her own bed, though she had no memory of how she had arrived there. The room was dark save for the fire burning in the grate and a single candle on the bedside table. Her head ached abominably, and she felt weak and strange. "You are awake." The voice came from her left, and Vivian turned her head with difficulty to find Lord Rothwell seated in a chair beside her bed. He looked haggard, his usually immaculate appearance disheveled, his hair disordered as though he had been running his hands through it repeatedly. "What happened?" Vivian's voice emerged as barely more than a whisper. "You fainted in the servants' quarters. One of the footmen caught you before you struck your head, thank God. But you have been unconscious for nearly 2 hours. The doctor has examined you. He says the child is unharmed, but you have exhausted yourself dangerously. I was only trying to help." You were being reckless, again." His voice was harsh, but something in his eyes contradicted the anger in his tone. "Do you have any idea what it was like having them carry you to me unconscious? Do you comprehend how utterly terrified—" He broke off abruptly, rising from his chair and pacing to the window. Vivian watched him, confused by the intensity of his reaction. "I am sorry to have alarmed you," she said carefully. "I did not intend—" "Your intentions are irrelevant." He turned back to face her, and in the firelight she could see that his hands were trembling. "You carry my child. You have a duty to protect yourself, to protect that child. Running about in servants' quarters during a storm is hardly fulfilling that duty." There it was. The child, always the child, not her, never her. "Of course," Vivian said, her voice flat. "I shall be more careful in future. I would not wish to damage your property." "My property?" Lord Rothwell's voice rose slightly. "Is that truly how you see yourself? Is it not how you see me?" He stared at her for a long moment, some internal struggle evident in his face. Then, with visible effort, he mastered himself. "The doctor has ordered complete rest for at least a week. Mrs. Dutton will see to everything. You are to remain in bed and recover your strength. I shall leave you now to sleep." He departed before she could respond, leaving Vivian alone with her thoughts and her aching head and the profound loneliness that seemed to deepen with each passing day. But if Vivian thought that was the end of the matter, she was soon disabused of that notion. She woke the next morning feeling unwell in a manner that went beyond simple exhaustion. Her head still ached, but now she felt feverish as well, alternately too hot and too cold. When the maid came to help her dress, Vivian found she lacked the strength to rise from her bed. The doctor was summoned immediately. His examination revealed what Vivian had already suspected. She had developed a fever, likely from the combination of exhaustion and having been caught in the storm. It was not immediately dangerous, the doctor assured her, but it required careful monitoring. In her condition, any illness carried risks. What followed was a nightmare of disjointed time and confused sensation. The fever worsened throughout the day, and by evening Vivian was lost in delirium. She drifted in and out of consciousness, unable to distinguish between waking and sleeping, between memory and hallucination. At times she thought she was back in her childhood home. At others, she was standing before the altar at St. George's, watching Lord Rothwell's cold, indifferent face as he spoke vows he did not mean. Through it all, there was a presence beside her bed, a voice speaking to her, though she could not comprehend the words. Hands pressing cool cloths to her burning forehead. Someone holding her when the chills racked her body, keeping her warm and still until they passed. On the second day, the fever reached its peak. Vivian's breathing became labored, her lungs struggling. His visits grew more frequent, and he began to examine Vivian with a silent gravity that was more alarming than any declared concern. All the available treatments, bleeding, poultices, and a strong tincture of quinine, failed to halt the fever's devastating ascent. It was during the night of the second day, amidst a silence more absolute than any in the house, that Lady Vivian Rothwell stopped breathing entirely. The fever had exhausted her system to such a degree that her body simply ceased its struggle. For a span of time that might have been seconds or minutes, no one could say with certainty, she lay perfectly still, her chest neither rising nor falling, her lips beginning to take on a bluish tinge. Lord Damien Rothwell, who had not left her bedside for 2 days, despite the doctor's suggestions that he rest, felt the world narrow to a single, terrible point of focus. This could not be happening. Not again. He could not lose another wife, could not watch another woman die because of him, because of his cursed need for an heir. But even as his mind reeled with horror and despair, his body was moving. He pulled Vivian upright, supporting her against his chest, and struck her back sharply between the shoulder blades. Once, twice, 3 times, with increasing force born of desperation. On the fourth blow, Vivian gasped, a harsh, terrible sound, and then was coughing, struggling for air, her body convulsing with the effort of breathing. Lord Rothwell held her through it, supporting her weight, one hand pressed flat against her chest to feel the blessed resumption of her heartbeat beneath his palm. "Breathe," he commanded, his voice rough and strange to his own ears. "Breathe, damn you. Stay with me. Please, Vivian, stay with me." She could not have heard him. She was too lost in the struggle for air, but somehow her body obeyed. The coughing eased. Her breathing, while still labored, became more regular. Color slowly returned to her lips. The doctor, who had been preparing himself to inform Lord Rothwell that he had lost his second wife, instead found himself examining a patient who, whilst critically ill, was decidedly alive. The crisis had passed. The fever would need to run its course, but the worst was over. Lord Rothwell did not leave her side. He held Vivian against his chest, feeling each breath she took as though it were a personal gift, a reprieve he had not earned, but for which he was desperately grateful. And in the quiet hours of that night, with only the sleeping Vivian and an unconscious universe as witnesses, Damien Rothwell came face to face with a truth he had been fleeing for 6 months. He loved his wife. Not the perfect, ethereal Eleanor, gone these 5 years and transformed by grief into something she had never been in life. But this difficult, brave, impossible woman he had married out of necessity, and then tried so desperately not to see. This woman who rescued drowning children without thought for her own safety, who worked alongside servants during storms, who called him out on his coldness with a courage that shamed him. He loved her, and he had very nearly killed her through his neglect and his stubborn refusal to acknowledge what she meant to him. The child she carried mattered, certainly, but if given the choice between the child and Vivian, there would be no choice. He wanted Vivian. He needed Vivian in a way that had nothing to do with heirs and everything to do with the emptiness that had characterized his existence until she entered it. The realization was terrifying in its intensity. It meant vulnerability. It meant risking the kind of pain he had sworn never to endure again. But as he sat there in the darkened room, holding his wife as she fought her way back from the edge of death, Lord Rothwell discovered that he was willing to risk all of it. If only Vivian survived. If only he was given the chance to tell her, to show her, to beg her forgiveness for the months of coldness and cruelty. If only it was not too late. The fever broke on the morning of the 3rd day, leaving Vivian weak as a newborn kitten, but blessedly clear-headed. She woke to find sunlight streaming through her windows and Lord Rothwell asleep in the chair beside her bed, his head resting awkwardly on the mattress near her hand, his face gray with exhaustion. She studied him in the morning light. He looked older than his years, worn down by grief and self-imposed isolation. But there was something different about him now, some subtle change she could not quite identify. As though sensing her regard, his eyes opened. For a moment, they simply looked at each other. Then Lord Rothwell sat up quickly, wincing at the protest of muscles held in uncomfortable positions. "You are awake," he said, and his voice was hoarse. "How do you feel?" "Weak," Vivian admitted, "but clear-headed." "What happened?" "I remember feeling ill, but then everything becomes confused. You developed a severe fever. You have been delirious for 3 days. The doctor—" He stopped, swallowed hard. "The doctor was concerned we might lose you, and indeed, for a time—" Again he could not finish. "But I am here," Vivian said gently, confused by the raw emotion in his voice. "I am well, or I shall be, with rest." "Yes." Lord Rothwell rose from his chair and paced to the window, his back to her. When he spoke again, his voice was carefully controlled. "The child is unharmed. The doctor examined you thoroughly. Whatever else has occurred, the heir is safe." The heir? Of course. That was what mattered. Vivian felt something inside her harden. "I am gratified to hear it," she said, and her voice was as cold as his had ever been. I should hate to have failed in my purpose. Lord Rothwell's shoulders tensed, but he did not turn around. Vivian, I am rather tired, my lord. Perhaps you might send Mrs. Dutton to sit with me? I am sure you have estate matters requiring your attention. For a long moment, he remained motionless. Then, without another word, he left the room. Vivian closed her eyes and willed herself not to weep. But if Vivian expected Lord Rothwell to retreat back into his previous distance, she was surprised to discover otherwise. He did not resume his visits to her bedside. She had made it clear she did not welcome his presence. But he was everywhere else. The morning after the fever broke, whilst Vivian slept, Damien went to the picture gallery. He did not think, he simply acted. The portrait of Lady Eleanor, the symbol of his mourning and his prison, was removed by him alone, without the help of servants, and carried to the dark attic. The weight of the gilded frame was the weight of the past he had finally decided to abandon. She would wake from afternoon naps to find fresh flowers in her room, hothouse blooms that must have cost a fortune. Books she had mentioned wanting to read appeared on her bedside table. When she expressed a craving for a particular type of apple that was out of season, an entire crate somehow materialized from London. The harp in the music room was uncovered and tuned. The flowers in the conservatory were joined by new varieties. Vivian observed these changes with confusion and hesitant hope she tried desperately to suppress. What did it mean? Her recovery was slow but steady. Within a week, she was strong enough to leave her bed for short periods. Within 2 weeks, she could walk about her chambers. The doctor pronounced himself cautiously optimistic. It was during her 3rd week of recovery that Lord Rothwell requested an audience. Vivian, who had been spending her afternoon in her sitting room with a book, looked up in surprise when Mrs. Dutton announced his presence. "Admit him," she said, setting aside her book. Lord Rothwell entered and stood awkwardly near the door. He looked better than during her illness, less haggard, more rested, but there was a tension in his bearing that was new. "I hope I am not disturbing you." "Not at all. Please sit." He crossed the room and sat, but perched on the edge as though prepared to bolt. For several moments, he simply looked at her. "I owe you an apology," Lord Rothwell said at last. "Many apologies, in fact, but I hardly know where to begin." Vivian's heart began to beat faster, but she kept her expression neutral. "You owe me nothing, my lord. You have fulfilled your obligations admirably. Material comforts are not what I speak of." He leaned forward. "I have treated you abominably, Vivian. I married you under circumstances that gave you no choice, brought you to a house haunted by ghosts I would not relinquish, and then proceeded to treat you as though you were nothing more than a necessary inconvenience. You deserved better. You deserve better still. Why are you telling me this now? Because when you stopped breathing..." His voice broke, and he had to pause. "When you stopped breathing, I realized that I did not give a damn about the air. I only wanted you back. I wanted you to live, even if it meant losing the child. Even if it meant you hated me for the rest of your life, I needed you to survive it." Vivian stared at him, scarcely daring to breathe. "I loved Eleanor," Lord Rothwell continued, staring at his hands. "Or I thought I did. In truth, I loved the idea of her more than the woman herself. She was beautiful and accomplished, and I was young and foolish enough to believe that was sufficient. I did not know her, not truly. I did not listen when she tried to tell me she was unhappy, lonely, frightened." "You found her diary," Vivian said softly. He looked up sharply. "How did you know?" "I found it first, in the library. I read it, though I probably should not have." Lord Rothwell nodded slowly. "I found it weeks ago when I was removing her portrait. Reading it was illuminating and devastating. To realize that I had failed her so completely that she died believing I cared more for the child than for her." He drew a shaky breath. "And then to recognize that I was doing precisely the same thing to you. History repeating itself. Tragedy upon tragedy. All because I was too much a coward to risk caring again. And now? Now I am still a coward, but I find I would rather risk everything than continue as we have been. He rose from his chair and, to Vivian's shock, knelt beside hers, taking one of her hands in both of his. I do not expect you to forgive me, Vivian. I do not expect you to return any affection I might offer. But I need you to know that you matter. Not the child you carry, but you. Your intelligence, your courage, your kindness, even in the face of my cruelty. Vivian felt tears gathering. Why did you never say anything? All these months, I thought. I know what you thought. And you were right to think it. His hands tightened on hers. When you stopped breathing, when I thought I had lost you, I finally understood what Eleanor must have felt. The knowledge that you are valued only for what you can produce, not for who you are. It is a special kind of horror, and I inflicted it upon both of you. I do not want to be Eleanor, Vivian said, tears falling. I cannot be her. I will never be her. I do not want you to be Eleanor. Lord Rothwell reached up and brushed a tear from her cheek. I want you to be Vivian. Difficult, brave, impossibly stubborn Vivian, who risks her life for drowning children and refuses to rest even when fever threatens to consume her. The woman who saw through my cruelty and called me out on it. The woman who deserves so much more than I have given her. What are you saying? I am saying that I love you. I am saying that if you will permit it, I should like to begin again. Not as strangers bound by contract, but as two people who might learn to build something real together. I am saying that I am terrified of losing you, not because of any child you might bear, but because somewhere in these past months you have become essential to me in ways I did not recognize until I nearly lost you. Vivian looked into his eyes and saw vulnerability, fear, hope. I do not forgive you, she said slowly, watching his face fall, then hastening to add, not yet. You have hurt me deeply, Damien, made me feel small and worthless and alone. Forgiveness will take time. He nodded, disappointment evident. I understand. But, Vivian continued, her hand covering his where it still rested against her cheek, I am willing to try, to begin again, to see if we might build something real from these ruins. The smile that broke across Lord Rothwell's face transformed him utterly. He leaned forward and pressed his forehead to hers, careful of her condition. Thank you, he whispered. Thank you for giving me a chance I do not deserve. They remained thus for several moments. Then Lord Rothwell drew back and stood, helping Vivian to her feet. You should rest. I have exhausted you with this conversation. Perhaps a little, Vivian admitted. But it was a good exhaustion, a necessary one. He guided her toward her bedchamber, his hand at her elbow. At the door, he hesitated. Might I visit you again tomorrow? To read to you, perhaps, or simply to sit with you if you prefer company? I would like that, Vivian said. Then, gathering her courage, and Damien? Call me Vivian. Not Lady Rothwell or my lady, just Vivian. His smile returned, softer. Vivian. Sleep well, Vivian. Good night, Damien. The weeks that followed brought transformation. Damien was true to his word. He visited daily, bringing books and conversation, and gradually, pieces of himself he had kept hidden. They spoke of childhoods, of the war, of hopes and fears. Vivian shared her dreams of perhaps writing, her love of history. Damien listened with an attention that made her feel truly heard. The physical distance between them decreased gradually. At first, Damien maintained careful propriety, but as days passed and Vivian's health improved, small intimacies accumulated. A hand on her shoulder as he read to her, his arm around her waist as they walked through gardens, the press of his lips against her forehead. And then, one evening, as they sat before the fire, Damien reached for her hand and simply held it, his thumb tracing small circles on her palm. Neither spoke. Words seemed inadequate. When he finally rose to leave, he brought her hand to his lips and kissed it with tenderness that made Vivienne's breath catch. Her pregnancy advanced. She was now 7 months along, her body transformed. Damien seemed fascinated by her condition, often placing his hand gently on her swollen belly to feel the child move. "A miracle," he murmured one evening. "To think there is a person in there." "Your heir," Vivienne said, testing him slightly. Damien's eyes met hers, serious and steady. "Our child, a boy or a girl, healthy or otherwise, I shall love them because they are yours and mine together. The estates can go to my cousin if they must. This child matters because they are ours." It was the right answer, and Vivienne believed him. As her confinement approached, arrangements were made with military efficiency. The doctor visited weekly. A monthly nurse was engaged. Damien moved into the connecting chambers, explaining he wished to be near should she need anything during the night. It was during her 8th month that Vivienne finally voiced her deepest fear. "What if something goes wrong?" she asked one night. "What if it is like Eleanor? What if the doctor must choose?" Damien turned to her, his face grave. "There will be no choice. If it comes to that, and pray God it does not, you are to be saved. I have made this abundantly clear to the doctor. The child, whilst loved, is not worth your life, not to me, never to me. But your heir. Damn the heir, damn the estates, damn every expectation if it means losing you." He took her face between his hands. "You are not Eleanor. You are not a vessel or a means to an end. You are Vivienne, and you are everything. Do you understand me? Everything." Vivienne nodded, unable to speak. And when Damien kissed her, truly kissed her, with passion and tenderness, she kissed him back, pouring into that kiss all her feelings. When they parted, Damien rested his forehead against hers. "I love you," he said. "I should have said it 100 times by now, but I am a fool. But I love you, Vivienne. Not for the child you carry, not for any duty you perform, but for yourself, for who you are." "I love you too," Vivienne whispered. "God help me, I think I have loved you for weeks. I did not want to. But you have become dear to me, Damien, so very dear." Vivienne's labor began on a gray morning in late April, 3 weeks early. She woke to a dull ache in her back and knew with certainty that this was real. "Damien," she called. He appeared immediately. One look at her face told him everything. "I shall fetch the doctor and nurse." The hours that followed blurred together. The doctor arrived and pronounced that everything appeared normal. The monthly nurse, Mrs. Green, took charge efficiently. Damien tried to stay, but Mrs. Green shepherded him out. The contractions grew stronger as morning gave way to afternoon. Vivienne bore them as well as she could, but as hours passed and pain intensified, she began to understand why women feared childbirth. "You are doing very well, my lady," Mrs. Green assured her. But not much longer proved to be hours more. The afternoon faded into evening. Vivienne's strength began to flag. She was exhausted, drenched in sweat, every muscle trembling. She heard the doctor speaking in low tones with Mrs. Green, heard terms like prolonged labor and small pelvis, and felt her fear spike. This was how it had happened with Eleanor. "I want Damien," she gasped. "Please, I want my husband." Mrs. Green looked uncertain, but the doctor nodded. "Fetch Lord Rothwell." Damien entered moments later. He came straight to the bedside and took Vivienne's hand. "I am here," he said, his voice steady. "I am here, and I am not leaving. Whatever comes, we face it together." "I am frightened," Vivienne admitted, tears streaming. "I know, so am I. But you are the bravest person I have ever known, and if anyone can do this, it is you." Another contraction seized her, and Vivienne bore down with renewed determination. She would not die. She would not leave Damien to mourn another wife. She would survive this. The night deepened. The doctor announced it was time to push in earnest. What followed was an eternity of pain and effort, of Mrs. Green's voice encouraging her, of Damien's hand in hers providing an anchor. And then, just when Vivian thought she could endure no more, she felt a sudden release. A thin, reedy cry filled the room, and Mrs. Green exclaimed in triumph, "You have a daughter, my lady, a fine, healthy daughter." Vivian collapsed back, scarcely able to process the words. A daughter. Not the heir Damien needed, but a daughter. She turned her head to look at her husband, expecting, what? Disappointment? But Damien was staring at the tiny, squalling bundle with such wonder, such pure joy. "A daughter," he repeated, his voice thick with emotion. "We have a daughter." Mrs. Green brought the child to them, carefully placing the tiny infant in Vivian's arms. Vivian looked down at her daughter, small but perfect, with dark hair and eyes that were, unmistakably, the same pale, intense blue as her father's, and felt her heart expand impossibly. "She is beautiful," Damien whispered, one finger gently stroking the baby's cheek. "Absolutely perfect." "I am sorry," Vivian found herself saying. "I know you needed a son." "Vivian." Damien's voice was gentle but firm. "Look at me." She obeyed. "I do not care that she is not a son. I do not care about the succession or the estates or anything except that you are both alive and well. This child is ours, yours and mine, and I love her already beyond reason." He bent and pressed a kiss to Vivian's forehead, then another to their daughter's head. "Thank you. Thank you for her. Thank you for surviving. Thank you for being here." Vivian cried then, great heaving sobs of relief and overwhelming emotion. Damien held them both carefully, providing support and comfort. When all was settled and Vivian had been made comfortable, the baby fed and swaddled and sleeping peacefully, Damien showed no sign of leaving. "You should rest," Vivian murmured, already halfway to sleep. "I am exactly where I wish to be," Damien replied, settling into the chair beside her bed. "Sleep, my dear. I shall watch over you both." Vivian let her eyes close. "I love you." "And I love you," came the reply, soft and sure. "More than you will ever know." And so, in the heat of labor and the quiet of the morning, the man who had taken her as a burden at last found her to be his reason to live.